There's a minhag amongst Klal Yisrael, the Ramah brings it already in the Torah, to Klal Yisrael learn Pirkei Avos. After Pesach, at least until Shavuos, some in fact have the minhag of learning it all throughout the summer, and I'd like to explain, before we go and delve into the actual Mishnayos, I want to talk a little bit about Masechtas Avos, about the inyan of learning Pirkei Avos and the Masechta of Avos itself, because there's so much to discuss, there's so much to understand what is going on behind the scenes before we actually start the Mishnayos. So first of all, the most penetrating question that everyone has when they open up the Masechta is that generally any Masechta that discusses a topic is called after that topic. So, for example, you have, the Masechta Sukkah is Sukkah, and then you've got Psachim, and then you've got so many. You've got Shabbos, and you've got Erevin, and you've even got, Beitzah, because it starts talking a little bit about the egg that's born. Many of the Masechtas discuss that which it is. What is Masechtas Avos discussing, and why is it called Masechtas Avos? Why does this sum up the whole Masechta? What is going on over here that we have to understand before we start the learning of Pirkei Avos? So the Nesiv Shalom, the Slanim Rebbe, brings a Gemara, famous Gemara in Baba Kama Daf Beis Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says, Avos michlal de'ika toldos, that wherever there are Avos, there are also going to be toldos. So what exactly is going over here? What is the Av that we're dealing with, and what are the toldos? In other words, it's called Avos because it means and it refers to fathers. In fact, many of the Mefarshim mean that the Masechta of Avos literally means our father's father follows none of the rules that we normally go into, and therefore it must be dedicated to the Torah as transmitted by the Avos, by the fathers, which is interesting because the Avos normally refer to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We know in Masechtas Avos, Avram Avinu is only mentioned, but only briefly, in the 5th Perek, not even mentioned till you get to chapter 5. So that leads us to understand what's going on over here. So the Rambam explains Pshat like this, and we'll get back to the Nesiv Shalom in a moment. But the Rambam explains that the word Avos, he says, refers to all leaders of the Jewish people in a very broad sense. That at the end of the day, all of our Gedolim, all of our leaders, these are our spiritual fathers. And he goes through, the Rambam, interestingly enough, goes through how we find this, both in Tanakh and all over the place. For example, we find that Eliyahu Novi rose to the Shamayim when his Talmud Elisha called him my father, my father. Later, Yosha, the king of Yisrael, also addressed Elisha as my father, my father. The Gemara tells us in Idias, in Perek Aleph, that Hillel and Shammai are called the fathers of the world. Very interesting. Rabbi Tarfon, the Tosefta tells us, is called the father of Klal Yisrael. Yerushalmi and Yuma tells us Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kiva refer to the fathers of the world. And finally, as the Medrash tells us in Devarim Rabbah, Gimel Tes, that Moshe Rabbeinu is the father of all Nevi'im. So basically what seems to be, and we'll see as we get into the first Mishnah, it fits in very beautifully, that all of Torah is given as a Masorah. It's given from Rebbe to Talmud, from father to son, and that's how we receive the Torah as we have it today. And that is basically how the Torah is transmitted, and we'll see as we get there to Mishnah Aleph, we'll discuss that in more length. But I want to go back for a moment to the Nesiv Shalom, the Slanim Rebbe, how he explains. He says that one on Midas, at the end of the day, Pirkei Avos is basically the Masechta of Midos Tovos. That's what it is. And as we go through all the Mishnayos, Be'ez Hashem, we'll see how far we get. I'm not sure this year how far we'll get. Maybe every year we'll do a little bit. But at the end of the day, that is what Pirkei Avos is. It's the Midas. What is Midas? Says the Slanim Rebbe and Nesiv Shalom, they are the definition of a Yid. It means rewiring our mind to react as a Yid, to feel a Yid, and to think as a Yid, to change our natural tendencies to Torah tendencies. That's the sensitivity that we're meant to be having. Reb Chaim Vital asks why Midas are not explicitly discussed in the Torah. In other words, nowhere in the Torah does it say not to get angry. There's a lot of Midas that we discuss, and what we're going to discuss Be'ez Hashem over here, that are not mentioned mefurish in the Torah. And Reb Chaim Vital answers, because character refinement has to take place before we even think about learning the Torah. What we know and we say, derech eretz kodma la Torah. Before we can sit down and learn Torah, before we can keep the Torah and do everything the Torah demands of us, the very first thing we have to do is be a mensch, is to learn how to think like a yid. Says Reb Chaim Vital, he's telling us to live and learn and behave like a yid. That's midas. But first you have to be a yid. And this is what Masechtas Avos is all about. The entire Torah is a tolda to this Av, which is why so beautifully he explains it's called Masechtas Avos, because this is the Av and everything else is the tolda. Incredible. He moves on and he continues the Nesiv Shalom, Mislonim Rebbe, and he says we find another fascinating idea. Why the name Avos? We know Chazal tell us the Gemara in Yuma Daf Chof Chesam and Aleph. The Gemara says, "Meimeyan shel Avoseinu lo porsha yeshiva mehem." In all the days of our Avos, there was never stopped to be a yeshiva. What does that mean? What did they learn exactly in this yeshiva? So I think it basically means from the accomplishment of the Avos, we can understand what they learned and what they did. Avram Avinu perfected the midah of chesed. Any chesed that we have in our lives and we're seeing in our lives and in everyone else's lives is basically because of Avram Avinu. Yitzchak represented Gevura, right? He served the Rabbeinu Shalom with tremendous greatness with Gevura, and Yaakov, as we know, excelled in the midah of Tiferes. Now, pre-Matan Torah, there was a crucial focus of what they study and what they learn was the subject of Midas, the subject that served as the basics and the basis for Torah Hashem. And only after this was done and the Midas were infused in Jewish blood and we can inherit that blood, now we can learn Torah. Which is how beautiful it is that we learn Pirkei Avos after Pesach, because that's when we became Yidden, when we were born as Yidden, and we finish it according to some by Shavuos. Every chapter, every perek, another week. Because once it comes to Shavuos, it's Kabbalas HaTorah. So first we start with Pirkei Avos, and that leads to Kabbalas HaTorah. Says the Nesiv Shalom Mislonim Rebbe, that's why this Masechta comes first. It comes first before everything else, because at the end of the day, it comes before everything else. Now, we know Rabbi Yisrael Salanta famously said that it's easier to learn the entire Shas, which those who learn Daf Yomi, you can understand how hard that is, right? Even a Daf a day, which is a lot, 7.5 years. And if you do 7 blat a day, that's an awful amount in 1 year. But it's still easier to learn all of Shas than change one midah, than just change one character trait. But that, at the end of the day, is what we were sent down to this world to do. The Vilna Gaon famously writes, what is the tachlis of a Yid? What is the purpose of a Jew in this world? Says the Vilna Gaon, Tikkun Amidas, that's it. Rabbi Sai, Masechtas Avos, this is what we are doing. We are perfecting our midas, we are refining our character traits. Now, the Rabbeinu Shalom, when he created the world, said a very interesting thing. If you look in Bereshis, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chavav, and I'll translate it, let us make man. Very interesting statement. Why does the Rabbeinu Shalom use the word us? Let us make man. What participation in the creation of man is the Rabbeinu Shalom seeking from us? Explains the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. He explains that all other living things were created in a state of completion. Man, however, was created in a state of potential. Man was given bechira. We have free will. Man may allow himself to be dominated by his inner drives, in which case you are nothing more than an intellectual animal. However, man also has the capacity to elevate himself above the animal level to become a spiritual being. This transformation is in the hands of man, of us alone. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't interfere, it's free will, and therefore we have to participate in our own creation. And this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom says the Baal Shem Tov is referring to in our participation. When the Rebbeinu Shalom said, let us make man, is the Rebbeinu Shalom will create the physical, he will create the opportunities for us, and it's this Masechta and Pirkei Avos that will create for us the actual way of getting there and creating ourselves to make ourselves a better person. Okay, so a couple of last things before we finish the introduction for today Another interesting question is, why is the Masechta of Avos, and again all of this has a lot of meaning to it, placed in Nezikin? Seder Nezikin, we know, Shishe Sidrei Mishnah, there are 6 orders of the Mishnah, and one of them is in Seder Nezikin. Seder Nezikin, as we know, has many things, for example, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra. What's going on? Why is Masechtas over in Nezikin? Generally, Nezikin deals with Dine Mominus, right? Damaging properties, all of these sorts of things. Why exactly is Avos placed? And there's obviously a reason for it over here. And I want to mention to you just one particular idea from a Sefer Magen Avos. Magen Avos was written by Rav Shimon Bar Tzemach Duran, the Rashbatz, famously Rashbatz, and he explains like this. He explains the reason that Avos is in Ezik, and he brings a Gemara in Baba Kama Daf Lamed Omid Aleph, which of course we have to start learning Pirkei Avos with this Gemara. Where the Gemara tells us a very interesting thing. A Gemara says that if a person wants to be a chosid means he wants to be a pious person, he wants to go beyond the letter of the law, he has to learn Masechtas Avos. And it's very, very interesting because there are 3 qualities that we say. The first quality the Gemara tells us is a person that makes brachas. A person makes brachas out of gratitude to the Rabbeinu Shalom for everything that he's given. The second thing the Gemara tells us is a person is careful for other people's money. And the third thing is a person learns Masechtas Avos. Says the Rashbatz, when a person is exacting in making brachas, he grows immediately a chosid on his sensitivity of his relationship to the Rabbeinu Shalom. He's careful about his brachos because he's careful about what he eats, and he realizes that everything he has comes from Hashem. And therefore his relationship with Hashem automatically improves and he becomes a chosid. That's number 1. Number 2, if a person is careful about other people's money, becomes very careful in ben odom lechaveroi. He becomes careful in other people's feelings and how other people are going to react in his interpersonal relationships. And the last thing is a person that understands and fulfills the ethical instructions of Avos, becomes an unbelievable individual in both fields. In both his ben odom lemokim and his ben odom lechaver, which is why it's number 3 on the list, and why it definitely sums up both of those and encompasses both of those things. And explains the Rashbatz, after the Gemara discussed brachas and monetary law, it then presents the teachings of Avos, which leads a person to the most perfected form of a chassid, and such a person is good in this world, in the relationship to the Rabbeinu Shalom, and also in his relationship to other people as well, which is an incredible thing. Now, just one last thing as well. Why is Pirkei Avos learned specifically now in the summer Shabbosim as a preparation for Kabbalah Torah? This seems to be the minhag, right? You learn Pirkei Avos in the period from Pesach to Shavuos, as we mentioned, and there's a 6 weeks period. Every single Shabbos is another parak of Pirkei Avos, and you can basically finish all of them when it comes to Shavuos. And the answer is like this. The answer is that when we receive the gift, particularly one that's very, very precious, we have to be sure we have the means of not only receiving it, but also keeping it. What do we need to receive the Torah? A good character. Derech Eretz Kodum ala Torah, and Pirkei Avos is totally unparalleled in its training of a person and preparing him for this moment, and this is a prerequisite for this. But there's something else as well. As I mentioned, some people have a minhag, the Torah brings us down, not to finish by Shavuos, but to continue going the entire summer of learning Pirkei Avos. What's the reason for this? You know why? And I saw this brought down, that summer and the spring as well, these are seasons that are characterized by a sense of freedom. People go out, it's not raining anymore, the cold has passed, everything's blossoming, everything's fresh, everything's nice and warm. People go out of their, regular routines, they stretch their muscles, things are relaxed, things are enjoyed in a different way. And that's perhaps why we stress the learning of Pirkei Avos specifically now, during the spring, during the summer season as well. We extend it to then, because winter is a time of ploughing and sowing, a time of investment. Spring is the time when this investment becomes and begins to bear fruit, and therefore the days of Pesach are the beginning of spring, the days of the barley harvest. With Shavuos comes the harvesting of the wheat, and after this comes a succession of the harvesting of the grapes, the figs, the olives, and everything else, and a person is so involved that he has to learn to stop for a moment and think about where he's holding as a yid, as a character, in order to makabel the Torah, in order to keep everything he gained over Pesach in a way that he'll be able to become a more perfected person. And Be'ezah Hashem, the Rabbeinu Shalom will give us siyata d'shmaya to learn the Masechta in a tremendous way, to understand it, and not only just to learn it, but to live it and to implicate it into our lives. Thank you for listening. Mitzvah Shem. Next time we'll start the next Mishnah.